All right, guys, so we are back with another round of portfolio reviews, and today we are going to go under the hood and take a look at 3 different portfolios. We'll check out all of the holdings, and I'll give my honest thoughts on what I like about them, as well as what I think could be improved. And as we're going through these, guys, keep in mind, I am by no means a professional. These are just my amateur opinions, so definitely take them with a grain of salt. And remember that at the end of the day, this is all just for fun. Now, real quick, before we get into it, if you want to have your portfolio reviewed by me in one of these videos, just fill out the form I have linked in the description. And also, as we're going through these, leave me a comment below and let me know your thoughts on these portfolios. I'd be curious to see your feedback as well. All right, guys, now kicking it off with our first portfolio of the day. This one belongs to my friend Sylv here, who's been investing for less than 1 year. So Sylv is relatively newer to the investing game and hopes to realistically live off dividends sometime in the next 2 to 3 decades. So a relatively long time horizon. And every single month, Sylv is investing 700 to 1400 Romanian leu, I hope I pronounced that right, into his portfolio. So a good chunk of change. And here are Sylv's notes for us before we take a look at the portfolio. He says, "Hello, I'm 27 years old, based in Eastern Europe, where the minimum wage is 500 leu, and I'm 4 months into the game. Please consider in Europe, we can't buy a lot of US ETFs. I know I have mostly REITs in my portfolio. I really love to see those dividends rolling, hee hee. This will become important as we take a look at the portfolio. You guys will see what I'm talking about in just a moment. But anyway, continuing on, for my short-term goal, I want to have 10K in REITs. After that, I would want to diversify and buy VUSA. I know this is not optimal, meaning I know the current state of my portfolio is not optimal, but it is what brings me joy at this point in my life for the short term. For medium-term goals in the next year or two, I would love to have a little more structure in my portfolio." So a lot of good notes there for us. And before we take a look at Sylv's portfolio, guys, I just want to give you a quick heads up. This is going to be unlike any other portfolio that we've looked at so far in this video series. And when I first saw this, it was like the first time in my life that I was actually speechless. All right, guys, so here is Sylv's portfolio, and he has shared it with us over here on Getquin, which is hands down one of my favorite portfolio tracking platforms. If you guys are looking for something with a lot more features and functionality than your standard spreadsheet, I highly recommend Getquin. And the best part is it's actually free to use. There's a link to Getquin in the description of the video. You can sign up for free. I highly recommend you check it out. But anyway, getting back to it, here we can see that Sylv's portfolio is currently valued at about $8,300, and for only having been invested for 4 months or so, I think that's pretty impressive. But here's where it gets interesting, guys. If we scroll down and take a look at all of the holdings here, we can see that there are only 5 different holdings in this portfolio, and they're all individual companies, number one. But number two, 3 out of these 5 holdings are REITs: Agree Realty, Vici Properties, and Realty Income. And also, guys, almost 100% of this portfolio is in 2 companies. We have 65% in Agree Realty. We have the other 31.7% in Vici Properties. So I honestly don't even know where to begin with this. So first and foremost, for someone who's only been investing for 4 months, I don't think that this structure for your portfolio is the right way to go about it. Like, I really don't think there's any good reason to have almost 100% of your portfolio just in these 2 stocks alone. And also, I don't think it makes sense to have that much of your portfolio in one sector either. Even though I really do like both of those companies, I think the worst part about seeing that, honestly, Sylv, is I think you know that it's something that you shouldn't be doing. I mean, if we refer back to your notes here, you kind of made a joke out of it. You said, "I know I mostly have REITs, but I really love to see those dividends rolling in, hee hee." And I get that. I really do. I love dividends as much as the next guy. And when it comes to dividends, really, it is the more than merrier. But my goodness, my friend, this is not how you should have set up your portfolio as someone who is brand new to investing. And like I said, I think you know that. I think you know that this is not the right approach. But overall, as someone who is pretty much brand new to investing, I just don't think you have any business putting that much of your portfolio into these 2 businesses, no matter how good they are. And like I said, I like both of these companies, but almost 100% of your portfolio in these 2 alone just doesn't make sense to me. And I think this is you're probably doing this more so just to maximize your dividends right out of the gate. I'm guessing that's why you want to have 10K specifically in REITs, because especially these 2, they are higher yielding investments. So you're really trying to juice those dividends, right off the bat. But anyway, I think the weighting that we're seeing here is more so because of that, rather than you having a super high amount of conviction in those 2 stocks. I think that's going to be a hard thing to do for someone who is, like I said, pretty much brand new to investing. So really, overall, I really wish you would have just started with ETFs. And I know you mentioned that in your notes. You said at some point you want to start adding to VUSA, which I believe is like some sort of European S&P 500 ETF. And I honestly wish you would have started putting all of your funds into VUSA instead of taking the approach that you did. Truth be told, and once again, I apologize if this is coming off as critical, but I think you did it completely backwards. But overall, if I was you, I would get into some ETFs ASAP. I would really focus my efforts on not only building out more diversification and not being so heavily weighted in REITs, number one, but two individual companies, number two. I would work your way out of that, build more diversification with ETFs, and I'd also put some more emphasis on dividend growth. You have a really long time until you plan to live off these dividends, so there's no need to go so heavy into high yielders right off the bat. And I'll say it one more time, I'm just so sorry if this came across at all too harsh. That was totally not my intent. It's just that, man, you can do better. I know you can do better, you can do better, and I believe in you. All right, guys, now this brings us to the second portfolio of the day, which belongs to my friend Brad. And Brad has been investing for somewhere between 1 and 5 years. And like Sylv, Brad also has quite the long time horizon before he realistically hopes to live off dividends. We're looking at 21 to 30 years, 2 to 3 decades, and Brad's really packing a punch in his portfolio. Every single month, Brad is investing $4,000. And Brad kept it nice and easy for us. He doesn't have any notes, so with that, we'll just jump into the portfolio. Now, Brad has shared his portfolio with me using my dividend portfolio tracking spreadsheet, which you can start using for free. There is a link to download the spreadsheet in the description of the video. And as we can see, in the time he's been investing, Brad has built up quite the portfolio. It's currently sitting at about $145,700, looking really good, and his portfolio is up 19.5%. Now, at this point in time, Brad's portfolio is yielding 3.1%, really solid, which means that every single year he's bringing in $4,500 of dividends, which amounts to $376 every single month and almost $87 every week. Now, jumping over to the positions page, one of the first things we'll notice here is that he has a very well-diversified portfolio. In total, there are 26 different holdings, 3 of which are ETFs. We have SCHD, SCHG, and VU. And in my opinion, if we scroll over just a little bit, there's not one position here that is too heavily weighted in the portfolio. I mean, at least nothing too crazy. The largest positions, as we can see, are SCHD and ETF, making up 12.75% of the total weighting. And then we have Meta, which is the heaviest position at 13.2%. But I think a lot of the reason it's become so heavy is because he's just seen a really nice gain with the stock. Now, because Brad's portfolio value is on the larger side, it's getting pretty close to 150K in this portfolio, I do think it could make sense to be a bit more spread out and have a larger number of holdings. But at the same time, if we take a look at all of these holdings, I do think there is room for consolidation. And if it was me, the first place I would start is with pretty much all of your tiny positions here. So like Amazon's a good example. It only makes up 0.14% of the total portfolio. And there's a few others in this account that are like that. I mean, Kroger's another one making up 0.66%. We have MPW, which is just barely over 1%. We'll throw that into the mix as well. PLL, which I could be wrong, but I think maybe that's some sort of mining company. That's only, a 0.1% of the portfolio. And then down here, we have Warner Brothers Discovery, just barely over 1% as well. And I also missed one, actually, Union Pacific, making up 0.7% of the portfolio. So if this was my portfolio and if I wanted to do some consolidating, streamline things a bit more here, that's the first thing I would do. I would get rid of all of those positions that we just looked at, the Amazons all the way down to WBD, all of those really small positions. And just those right there, that would take your number of holdings from 26 down to 20, which I think is a lot more manageable. Not only that, but it would unlock a decent amount of money, which you can reinvest into some of your other higher conviction holdings, which is also a good thing. Now, on top of that, I also do think there is room for consolidation here in the ETFs. I mean, we already saw you have SCHD, SCHG, and VU, all 3 great ETFs, but I don't necessarily think you need all 3 of these ETFs. I think you could probably stand to get rid of one of them, namely SCHG or VU. And if I had to choose between these two, I would pick SCHG, which only makes up 2% of the portfolio. So this is also not one of your larger holdings by any means. And I don't think you would miss out on too much by not owning SCHG because 60% of this fund's holdings are already in VU. So by owning both of them, you're kind of double dipping in a sense. And I also think there's an argument argument to be made for getting out of VU as well. So in addition to all of these positions here, Brad also has another positions page, which includes his 401k holdings. And in his 401k, it looks like it's just WFSPX, which is an S&P 500 index fund. And this is a really large position for Brad. I mean, if we scroll over looking at its weighting across the entire portfolio, it's 42.4%. So definitely a hefty position in the S&P 500 already. So because you have that in your 401k and because you're regularly investing into that, like I said, I think you could make the argument that you might not need VU in your regular account. And obviously, you know, holding on to VU is not going to be detrimental at all. Having more exposure to the S&P is you'll be just fine. I'm just trying to think of how to do the most with the least amount of possible holdings. How can we streamline this portfolio as much as possible? That's kind of what I'm looking at. And if you did all of these things, got rid of all 6 of those small positions, as well as the 2 ETFs, SCHG and VU, while still keeping the S&P exposure with your 401k, that would take your total number of holdings from 26 down to 18, which is great. And that number of holdings doesn't count the S&P index fund that you have in the 401k, but with that, it would go from 26 or 27 down to 19. But still, either way, I think that's looking really good. And, you know, just some things to consider. Now moving on to our third and final portfolio of the day. This one belongs to Kenny, who's been investing for less than 1 year. So definitely newer to the game. And Kenny, like the last 2 guys, has a pretty long time horizon, hopes to live off dividends sometime in the next 2 to 3 decades. Really solid. And Kenny's also really packing a punch in his portfolio. Every single month he's investing $1,500. And here are Kenny's notes for us, guys. He says, "Hey, my name is Kenny and I'm just getting started with investing. I'm 23 years old. Great job getting started so young. And I'm investing $1,500 a month as soon as I can pay off the little car debt I have left." That's awesome. Kenny says, "I work for Johnson & Johnson." Very cool. So I hear a lot about the company and the dividends they pay. That's what initially made me want to start the dividend journey. My wife and I have a combined income of $100,000 after tax. That's great. So I definitely want to increase my investment contributions in the future, given that we only have $2,000 in bills each month. Wow. I'm also from Commerce, Georgia. Now, guys, Kenny has shared his portfolio with us over on M1 Finance. This is the first time we're looking at one of the M1 pies in this video series, and the information I will say that M1 gives is a bit limited. Like, we won't be able to see the portfolio value. That's fine, we can live without that. There's some other stuff that we won't be able to see, but we will still get the important information. And this is what Kenny's M1 pie is looking like. There are 10 total holdings. The dividend yield is at 2.3%, so that's pretty solid. Pretty low expense ratio due to these ETFs here at 0.05%, so that's looking good. And now taking a look at all of these holdings, guys, like we said, there are 10 in total, 2 of which are ETFs right up here at the top. And in fact, these 2 ETFs combined make up 60% of the overall weighting. And then the remaining 8 positions are individual stocks, all at 5% each. And these are all going to be very recognizable names. You guys should know all of these. Now, overall, I really like this setup. I think this is a great looking portfolio for someone who is kind of just now getting into investing. This is exactly what I would hope to see. You know, a heavy emphasis on ETFs with some individual holdings thrown into the mix. You really get the best of both worlds. And as far as the ETFs go, there are only 2 here. You know, 2 really solid ETFs making up 60% of the total weighting. You know, sometimes in these situations when we look at these portfolios, we'll see investors who have 5, 6, 7 different ETFs. I think I've seen up to like 9 or 10 at one point in one of these videos. You guys will have to go back and look. But personally speaking, I think that's overkill. I think at the end of the day, all you really need are like 2 to 3 good ETFs. So I'm happy to see that here. And the rest of these dividend stocks, like, there's just nothing to complain about here. Costco, ExxonMobil, Johnson & Johnson, which he works for, which is very cool, Procter & Gamble, Realty Income, Visa, Waste Management, Coca-Cola, and they're all equally weighted, all 5% each. At the end of the day, this is probably kind of lame, but truth be told, I really don't have anything bad to say about this portfolio. And I would imagine, you know, obviously we don't have this information, but with a 2.3% starting yield and looking at the rest of these holdings and just how they're weighted, I would imagine the average dividend growth rate across this portfolio is either high single digits, very high single digits, or somewhere in the low double digits. So I think this is your classic dividend growth portfolio. Now, with that said, if I was being super nitpicky, if I had to find one thing negative to say about this portfolio, my only potential critique, and take it with a grain of salt. But the only thing I would say is I would maybe swap out VGT for a different growth-oriented ETF that's going to give you more broad diversification outside of just being so heavily invested in technology like VGT is. Like, I would maybe consider something like, you could go VU, or maybe something like SCHG even. And once again, it'd really be just for the sake of having more broad diversification. With something like SCHG, you'd still get a lot of exposure to those tech heavy hitters like Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, and Google, which are the top positions in VGT. But you'd also open yourself up to other sectors outside of tech, which would help build better diversification. But having said that, like, this is where you need to take it with a grain of salt. Having said that, VGT has outperformed SCHG over the last 10 years. So if I would have said this 10 years ago, and if you would have listened to me then, you wouldn't have fared as well. So once again, take that with a grain of salt. But anyway, guys, those were our 3 portfolio reviews of the day. And if you want to see some more portfolio reviews, then check out this playlist that I've put together for you right here. This contains all of the portfolio reviews that I've done so far. There are a few other videos in this playlist. And just like in this one, I'll give my honest take on what I like about these portfolios, as well as what I think could be improved. So click right over here to check all of those out, and I'll see you in the next one.